The amazing thing about foundation models is you don't know what they can do until you ask. This is the fundamental difference I'm still wrestling with in my brain.
How do you keep it real when you talk about generative AI without making it sound like a buzzword, especially when your audience is non-technical?
As software developers, we've been tool builders since the beginning of the era of software.
Were there any unexpected skills that turned out to be game changers for you?
You're putting a person behind the wheel of this really powerful car and they've never driven before. Maybe they get there, maybe they crash.
Hi guys, welcome back to 0 to 1. Today our guest is Jeff Barr, who is the VP and Chief Evangelist at AWS and one of the most iconic voices in cloud computing. He's been in tech since the 70s and has helped shape AWS into what it is today. If you've ever read an AWS blog that made something finally click, there's a very, very high chance that Jeff wrote it. He's known for making complex tech feel simple and continues to inspire thousands and thousands of people across the world. So thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us today.
Of course, really happy to be here and to be able to speak with both of you.
As the Vice President of AWS, many are curious about your journey. So where it all began and how your career evolved. Was becoming Vice President ever the plan?
No, it's really not. I'm not a person who makes long-term career plans. I've always really instead just did the things that felt most interesting and most personally kind of impactful and useful. And honestly, I haven't been super strategic. I just say, hey, that's kind of a cool thing. I'm going to jump in on that. And for a while, I was always really early on things. And I think something I've learned over the course of my career is sometimes you're starting something early and you do it for a while and it's not quite catching on. And you think maybe it's the wrong area to focus on. Then you also say, wow, I was just there a little bit too early and I just need to stick with it for a bit until it really does catch on.
You've held so many different roles across the years, from early engineering gigs to becoming the VP. So I'm curious, how did your skill set evolve as your responsibilities kind of shifted? Were there any unexpected skills that turned out to be game changers for you?
I would say really learning to be patient with people and to meet them where they're at. And I think one of the really fun parts of my job is to get to travel the world and to meet people on really any part of their life journey and their career journey. And to really understand, okay, everybody is in a unique personal situation. Related to that is really being really good at communicating with people and maybe understanding them, understanding a bit of body language. One of the reasons I love live audiences as opposed to kind of recording is that with the live audience, you get the immediate feedback. You get to see, are they understanding? Are they confused? Are they slowly looking and trying to figure out, when can I escape from here because this guy's really boring? Is the crowd actually growing a bit because word is spreading through the event that something really worthwhile is being presented? Are they looking engaged? Are they content? Are they actually really bored? Are they mystified because I speak one language and they hear something totally different?
I was opening Twitter right now and I saw someone posting about a panel.
That was probably Prague.
What will you be speaking about? Is it a specific topic that you're tackling? Or?
I'm talking about AI-powered coding assistants is the topic I want to get to. But what I like to do is, instead of just saying, starting from nothing, we're now here at this world of AI coding assistants. What I like to do is show a bit of history and say, okay, as software developers, we've been tool builders since the beginning of the era of software. First we would build things like an assembler to go from assembly language to machine language. We'd build editors, compilers, profiling tools, IDEs, the world of case tools, which has pretty much died out by now. But as developers, we are natural tool builders. And I want to really show that there's this, to me, very, very kind of step-by-step progression from those earliest tools up to now, thinking of saying, let's take all the tools we've built, all the API references, all the documentation, take all of that as effectively bits, put that into an LLM, and that's now the basis of our coding assistant. And to me, making it really clear this is just a step-by-step progression. Yes, it's somewhat of a disruption. It changes the way we think about writing code. But it was somewhat logical that we would get here eventually.
I think that's a cool thing to point out also, because a lot of us who are younger, we don't know that much about the history, and then questions we ask sometimes just lie in the past. You're looking back and you're oh, it's been done, I guess.
Exactly. Now, one of the awesome things about being in tech for a long time that's balanced out by how quickly our field evolves is that within the space of one career, you can use so many different programming languages and media types and devices and programming paradigms. And in other careers, I suspect that maybe you start and there's a couple innovations in the course of your career, but it hasn't changed that much in decades.
I actually have a question on that same note. I'm curious about what you think about, vibe coding, the consequences that vibe coding can have on your, on your code.
So there's this really interesting tension here. As developers, we all know that we're supposed to be building abstractions, and we're supposed to keep stacking up these abstractions higher and higher. And the whole idea of this abstraction is to say, there's some layer here, and this is the layer at which we would like you to think about what we're describing. And then there's a bunch of really interesting stuff underneath inside the abstraction. And by defining that abstraction, we're saying, don't worry about that. That's fine. I'm the abstraction builder. I will take care of that. You can proceed as if that abstraction is the only thing that exists. So that's what we're supposed to do as developers. On the other hand, we see people at that layer and we have a little bit of disdain for them sometimes. Like, oh, you're not a real developer because you don't really know what's inside. And it's this really interesting contradiction I'm noticing. We'd like to define the abstractions, but then we're a little bit disappointed when someone can only work in terms of that abstraction. The reality I found is that, yes, the abstractions are great as a thought model and a programming model, but that you always need to be able to step inside them to really know what's going on at that next level down. You're putting a person behind the wheel of this really powerful car and they've never driven before. Be like, okay, just kind of go over there. And they just turn the wheel and interesting stuff happens. And maybe they get there, maybe they crash. But it's like they have maybe access to more power than they fully understand. But there's probably going to be this meeting in the middle where they're going to use the vibe coding to build something. I would hope that they're going to have some level of curiosity where they're going to say, okay, I built this without really knowing exactly what's inside, but maybe I should just satisfy my own curiosity and figure out what's in there and how it works. I think in classic computer science education, we've taught people to start with a blank page or a blank screen and fill up with code. And that was the idea. That was the creativity, was the from nothing creation. And now we're saying the tool's going to create a bunch of code. Your screen is filled up with a bunch of code after you do just a little bit of work on your own. So I've proposed to audiences that your new job is actually make sure you're really, really good at reading other computers' code that's written for you, that you can't just hand wave past it and say, well, I fully trust the system to get it right for me. You as a developer, you're ultimately going to commit that code into your repo and your name's going to be on there. And there's not a footnote that says, this was vibe coded, so it might have errors, but too bad, so sad.
I guess if you're not curious, or at least some sort of curiosity, then the consequences, you will have to meet some severe consequences at some point, right? If you don't know anything about the code, or like you said, the fundamentals.
There's a point in every developer's getting started period where they write some code and it doesn't do what they expected, and they're not really good at debugging or understanding. And so they're like, oh my gosh, the compiler got it all wrong for me. That's one of those phases that most people get past of, okay, well, the compiler is probably pretty good, right? So there is this point in, I think, our maturity that we do blame the tools instead of, looking at ourselves. But also there were times, there were times when high level languages, when people said, okay, I'm gonna use the compiler and it's going to turn that into assembly language or machine language. We're going to trust the compiler to do the right thing. Well, as we step up the abstraction levels, it's just the same thing where we're expressing intent to one of these tools. And with the compiler, we're saying, okay, we want to declare some variables. We want to add them. We want to put them somewhere. We want to print the result. Okay. But then as we go another higher level, it's just the way we're specifying that intent that is different, that leaves some room for misinterpretation.
I want to focus more on your journey. So I know that you were in tech way before AWS was, even a thing. So I guess it's pretty open-ended, but what's like the craziest out of nowhere moment you've seen that like totally changed the game?
Honestly, when we launched EC2 and made it pretty trivial to get a server up and running out of nowhere was a really big deal. And I remember the craziest moment was right after we launched EC2 and presenting somewhere and showing, okay, and this was before we had the console. This is before we had any tools, when it was all API powered to launch an instance. And I remember showing, this is how you create the account and this is how you launch your first instance. And minutes later from the audience, someone yelled, "I just launched my own instance. This guy's telling the truth."
Live
And,
audience reaction right there.
Yeah, the live audience and the fact that it was doable, you're sitting there in the conference on the Wi-Fi and you actually managed to get to follow along with what I did and to prove or disprove my like claim in real time was awesome.
Where do you see AWS heading, as AI, I guess, like goes from just automating stuff to actually like creating new services? Do you think we'll ever see like an AI that evangelizes the cloud itself?
Being able to use AI to help create better content, I think, is certainly within the realm of possibility. And one of my favorite things to do is after I make my standard presentation, and I'll use things like our Nova models to create some illustrations for my presentations. I take my basic prompt for each image and I add a little bit of local flavor to the prompt. So in Japan, I just put in a Japanese style to the end of my prompt. And in Peru, it's like, okay, in a modern Peruvian style. And this simple act of customizing the prompt, I think is a really cool use of AI. But it also shows the audience that you did something very specific for them, that you're not bringing just the generic presentation and using it time after time after time.
Do you think that actually like they notice that when you speak, when you present?
I always call it out firsthand. My second or third slide, I just say images produced by Bedrock and Amazon Nova, and I show how I did it, and just to me that's just a really cool low key way to evangelize a service. You don't go and list 10 bullet points of what it does. You say, I did this really cool thing for you, and here's how I did it, and let them kind of figure out for themselves if that's interesting.
Show, don't tell. I like that. A lot of folks are, of course, buzzing about agentic AI, hearing it everywhere now, AI that acts with more autonomy and initiative. So do you see AWS leaning into that space?
I do love the idea that the AI, we can very selectively give it additional powers where it can go beyond just the model itself, and we can say, okay, here's different tools and here's what they can do for you. So I've been using, for example, the Amazon Q developer command line interface, the CLI. Super, super cool to see how it can read and write files, and it can basically do things on your behalf, which is what I think of the agent as doing. And it's very, very careful before each action. Says, I'm about to write a file to your file system. Yes or no? And you say, yep, go ahead and do that. I'm about to install Python. Yes or no? Okay, go ahead and do that. So that back and forth interplay is, to me, another one of those great learning opportunities where you can see what it would like to do for you, and you look at it, and it's up to you to say, is that the right thing to do? Is that a safe thing to do? It is absolutely true that we're now building things in a way that was different than the way we did it 2 years ago. But that's a little threatening for people who've been in the field for a while, because like, what happens to my career, and what's the value of all my skills and all my knowledge and my experience? And now we've got these new apps that are letting you use it in different ways. And it's more of a collaborative process between you and the AI, and the barrier to getting something running is much lower. And I love that, because that means more people are going to have, like you said, your cousin, they had a great idea and they didn't say, okay, I need to go and spend years and years learning something. I will rough it in using this AI, and I'll count on you to help them fill in the
That's exactly what's happening. So,
and like any kind of educational situation, you give them some of the answers and say, hey, that's kind of cool. Maybe you should go look that up. Like, that's the thing you learn as a parent. Like you don't know all the answers. You just kind of, maybe you should go research that and figure it out for yourself.
You're famous for breaking down complex, concepts into a way that's just easy to ingest for people. I feel like everyone needs to use AI in some sort in his day-to-day life, right? Whether you're technical or not, it doesn't really matter. If you don't use AI, you will be left behind. I'm wondering, how do you keep it real when you talk about generative AI without making it sound like a buzzword, especially when your audience is like non-technical?
So I always like to bring it back down to real things that you can do on a regular basis versus like, if we talked about LLMs and the vectors and the layers and the iterations and the attention. I don't understand how any of those kinds of things work, but I can benefit from them, and just really showing here's something I can do. And maybe it's a simple thing, maybe it's a complex thing, and being really clear about how I do it, and just actually say this is the prompt I used, this is what I got. And again, this is a bit of a layer of abstraction, and yes, people can open it up and they can figure out what all those attention layers and vectors and all those things mean if they really want to. But being able to show what you did and how you did it. And I actually make a habit of saving off all my prompts and files somewhere. And then sharing your successes, I think is a really fun, important thing to do.
I really like the idea of saving your prompts. I feel like sometimes I'll put in a prompt, it'll give me horrible results. I'll adapt it and then I'll like forget about it. So maybe I should start doing that too.
On the one hand, we think of these prompts as really valuable. But on the other hand, you start to think of the apps as somewhat discardable. Right? The long-term value of a lot of the kind of things we're going to build is going to be the data we collect and the way we organize it and the ways that we process it and retrieve it. And maybe the apps around that do all those things, maybe we kind of think of those as, you know what, we'll just build a fresh one of those every week or every day or whatever we want. And we'll just incorporate our learnings and let the AI get better and better at it versus do we treasure that app and do our best to fine tune it? Or is it, you know what, I don't care about the app, but let's just keep our data and our schemas in really good health.
I guess, yeah, there's two sides to it. So there's two ways to even like digest this. So in addition to just video prompts, I've seen you've been writing AWS blogs for decades, since 2004, which is absolutely crazy. And I see that you have been writing nonstop ever since, which A, is such a big skill set, but B, also just consistency is sometimes so hard. So kudos to you for keeping it up till date. And of course, writing is a form of storytelling. So how has storytelling shaped your career? And what's one post that you had the most fun writing about?
Let's see. So I actually did stop, believe it or not. I did 20 years on the blog and I wrapped up last December after I got the exact 20-year mark and I did wrap up. I loved doing it, but I wanted to make sure that I could do some other things before I end up retiring from AWS at some point. So I actually kind of found, I thought 20 years was a nice mark. I did 1.5 million words and like 3,300 posts over the years.
3,000 posts.
Really loved doing that. It was always fun. It was always challenging. I can't pick out any one post and say that was my favorite one ever to do. It was all the fun thing about doing that for so long was something brand new would be in your inbox all the time. And you'd start the writing process and think, this is a really cool topic. I know nothing at all about this. I'm going to have to actually dive deep on this pretty quickly and understand what it's all about so that I can't explain to anybody else until I actually understand it. Be able to just dive deep into things like quantum computing and say, I barely understand the math, I barely understand the science, but let me just study it like really intensely for a couple of days, make myself a lot of good notes, and then do my best based on what I figured out to explain it. It keeps your brain fresh and active by doing that.
For sure. I think one of the biggest takeaways for me as a student as well is I realized if I can explain it to my friend or my colleague or even someone with a non-technical background, that's when I really know it deeply. Otherwise, it's just like telling myself and I don't know how well I know it.
It's almost like that very act of explaining is some kind of like a data format conversion inside your brain. And that format conversion actually confirms whether you know what you're talking about or not. Like, because you can start to explain something and you realize that it makes no sense as you're saying it. You're like, wait. If I can't explain it, that I have this total misunderstanding.
I agree 100%. Obviously, AWS is known, for bold bets. That's why it's currently the leading cloud computing service in the world. I was wondering what's like the riskiest move you're exploring with AI, and how do you get others to buy into this vision?
So those are definitely business decisions that are. I know for sure that there's parts of the leadership that are the ones that figure out how do we take these bold bets and how do we decide which ones to do and how much to invest. That is definitely not something that I'm in the loop on at all. I'm happy that folks like Matt Garman and Andy Jassy figure out how to take those bold bets. There's a set of things that I'm really good at and that I really enjoy and that maybe I'm like among the best in the world at doing this. There's a whole bigger list of things that I'm really, really bad at. And so Amazon's been really good at letting me just find what we call our superpowers and play to those. And then a lot of things that I'm not, well, they're okay, like focus on the parts you're good at.
Were there ever moments where you thought like, oh, maybe this isn't working, or some struggles? I wanna hear about how you pushed through those.
So in the early part of my career, I lived on the East Coast of the US in Maryland. And this is like in the 80s and the 90s. There was no tech scene whatsoever back there. And I felt like it was in this weird like desert and that all the cool stuff was happening on the West Coast. And I had this just continuous sense that I was in the wrong place and that I really had to be somewhere else. And then, but you know, we had a young family and it wasn't practical to move to the West Coast just then. So I worked at some like pretty decent places, but it was always like I had my eye on elsewhere. And for a long time, I kind of watched the tech community grow up and thinking I sure would like to be part of that. And, you know, we finally moved to the West Coast and I worked for Microsoft for a bit. That should have been like wow, I'm suddenly here at Microsoft and everything's amazing. But the time I got there was kind of a challenging time for them. And it wasn't quite the awesome experience I was hoping for, partly due to me, partly due to them, and partly just due to the state of the tech world at the time. Watching it grow up from the outside and thinking, I really want to be a part of this from the inside versus the outside was way too long. It was like a lot of my like 20s and 30s, kind of seeing tech happen and not being at the bright center of it. So when I finally was, you know, at Amazon, and as AWS starts to grow, you suddenly say, wow, that spot I wanted to be in so long ago, like here I am. But you don't know like the first day you join. Like at first you join, it's your job for a while. And lots of great things happen to you and to the company and to the offerings. And one day you're like, wow, that place I wanted to be, like now I'm actually there.
I actually totally relate to the first part of seeing the action happen somewhere else, more internationally, because I was living in India at the time and I was looking at all these crazy like breakthroughs in the US and you know, like the infrastructure is here. So totally understand that feeling.
So you mentioned you worked at Microsoft for a bit, and you said this was in the early 2000s, you said?
I got there in 1997. They were in this big race to get to the internet. And they had done like IE3, IE4, and like everything to be interneted in some way. Like right now, every company is like, we have to put AI in our products. This was a time when like we need to put internet in all of our products.
Enterprise. Okay.
Whether it made sense or not.
I guess I want to talk a bit more about how you personally leverage AI on your day-to-day. I'm wondering if we're even close to, you know, having an AI write all of your AWS blog posts.
I think that there's certainly a lot to be said for having AI help you to come up with an approach on content. I do think that writing the content yourself and making sure that it's you and your style still continues to be really, really important. I've had a lot of success with our CLI tools, like the Q Developer CLI is super, super cool for just you state an idea and you get code really, really quickly that you can review and decide whether you like it and run it. One of my favorite tricks is to use that to build like command line applications and then get that working the way you want. And then I found this really magic phrase. I just say, convert this to a single page web app. And with no other prompt, you get HTML and JavaScript and CSS all in one file from what was your like Python command line app you were using a few minutes before, which like that's an absolutely really cool thing to do. And I've done it probably for 5 different things I've built, and I've gotten 5 successful outcomes so far. So that's a fun thing I've been working on.
Yeah, Amazon Qs is definitely interesting. I also use it on day to day, especially when I have to like, you know, debug, diagnose issues, or you know, dive into like logs and stuff. Amazon Q just does the filtering so well for me and like pinpoints the issue.
Yeah, I think we find our own use for these tools, and that's great. And I do find value in when I find something new to share it with my audience, and then hopefully they'll say, "Wow, that's kind of a cool unanticipated use. Let me try that out." Well, another fun thing that I did was before I went to my most recent trip was in Peru, and I wanted to do something unique for that audience. And so in kind of the more remote indigenous areas of Peru, some of the older people still speak this kind of antique language called Quechua. It's like kind of the pre-Spanish language that was spoken by the original occupants. And it's a language that dates back like hundreds of years. It's like the language your grandmother would yell at you in, basically. So used by any estimation. But I thought, let me see what happens. And I made a prompt for a pretty simple program in English. I used a third-party tool to translate into Quechua to make sure it wasn't being influenced by our own tools. And then I went to one of our models. I think I used the Nova model. And I put that prompt in. And sure enough, I got a Python program. So the cool thing was that means we're not going to insist that developers speak English anymore to write their prompts. You can effectively, the model seems to understand a bunch of different human languages, which I think is really, really cool. But the funny thing is the program that came back it understood my prompt, but for some reason the Python had comments written in Spanish, which was kind of weird. So then I just said, okay, reply only in Quechua. And it rewrote the program to be the way I wanted, which this was super, super cool as an example of making development accessible to a bigger audience.
So foundation models are trained on that.
The amazing thing about foundation models is you don't know what they can do until you ask. And this is the fundamental difference I'm still wrestling with in my brain. Any other piece of software, we build it to a spec and it has features 1 through N, right? And does this and this and this and this. You get to the bottom of it, that's all the things it can do. The foundation models are totally different. And there is no master list of questions you can ask or things it can do. You just keep asking. And if the first one doesn't quite do it, you ask the same question in a different way. You have to think about it really differently in order to really get the value out of it.
As the VP, you have so many different technical tasks. You're constantly working super busy. I want to know how do you find time for your hobbies and what do you enjoy doing in your free time?
So one of the things I really try hard to do is to give equal attention to all the different parts of my life. So my wife, our 5 children, our 7 grandchildren, make sure that everybody gets attention. And that if I'm putting more energy into one aspect, I say, okay, I'm not taking it away from the others. I try to ramp up all of them to get that same level of energy. So the things I've found most fun to do for my whole life, actually, I like to make stuff. And whether I make stuff with code or with Lego or with electronics or 3D printing, I just like to have ideas and make stuff and to solve problems. And I've been doing 3D printing for about 5 years. I think it was kind of a pandemic hobby. And so I've been doing things like doing 3D printing on fabric to make these really cool fabric designs I've got a sample here somewhere. Yeah, where's my sample? There we go. So this is hopefully you can kind of see how cool this is, but this is basically a layer of fabric with 3D printing above and below it. And there's actually programming involved as well here, where there's a really cool kind of graphical language called OpenSCAD. And you can write these really neat little functional programming scripts to generate geometries. The funny hobby that's now evolved out of that is whenever I travel and every culture, every art has different geometric patterns as part of their history. And so I always try to snap a picture of all the different cool geometric patterns I see. And I have a photo album of several hundred different cool ideas for different patterns I'd like to try to recreate.
That's a great example for even students out there, because as someone who is the VP, you constantly still have fun projects, things that motivate you every day that you're excited to build. That's the mindset everyone should strive for. So really cool. I also love fashion and tech, the intersection of that. So really cool to see that.
After all those decades in tech, what's the single most invaluable lesson that you've learned from watching the industry, evolve since you started your career? And how does that insight, shape your vision for the coming, cloud/AI revolution?
Okay, that is an awesome question. And what I always tell audiences is to not get yourself too stuck or captivated on one generation or kind of technology. At any given point, you're going to be working with some technology. It's well-developed. It's somewhat mature. All the features are in place. All the bugs have been worked out of it. All the rough edges are gone. And it can be a very comfortable place to be. But there's always a new thing that is a little rough, not quite finished. Maybe it crashes sometimes, doesn't have all the features. But if you wait until it does become mature, you're going to be a little bit late. So you always should have one foot in the current generation and the other on the next generation, and to try to adopt things and try them out and understand them before they become mainstream. And not all those new things will become mainstream, but if more than 0 of them do, you'll be in a great advantage for your career. And then if you start experimenting with a couple of these new things on your own time, let's say, and you've got anything more than 0 experience, at some point you'll be at your job and the boss comes in and says, hey, we're going to be doing an AI project or a quantum computing project or, a serverless project. And your colleagues are like, what's this guy talking about? This is all new stuff I never heard about. But you're like, you know what? I just did some serverless stuff on my own over the weekend. And you're like, you know what, boss? Hey, I know more than zero about this. And they're like, wow, that's awesome. Great initiative. Let's put you in charge and jump in and go for it. So that eye to the future, I think, is super, super worthwhile.
I think that's some of the greatest advice I've heard, because when you think of greater than zero, sometimes it's not in the most positive connotation. A really good example of how even knowing like a little more or going that extra mile sometimes can take you a lot further.
The thing is, that was derived from experience of watching people get stuck on one generation of technology. And they would just say, no, this thing right here, it's the ultimate. It'll never be bested. There is no next generation. And this was, I'd be like 20, and these are like these old people, like 40 or 50 or something. And it's like, it is going to get better. I know for sure it's going to get better. So, being aware of innovation and future development, I think is just really important.
Obviously, the podcast is called 0 to 1, right? So we index specifically on the journey a person went through from like the beginning, right? The zero to the person they are today. If you have like one example of how, you overcame like a struggle, or really anything you want to talk about from your journey.
There was the point in my career when the AWS Evangelist team was growing, and I was actually supposed to be managing a team and managing like, not a big team, like 3-4 people. I found that managing people was something I just did not like to do at all. And I took some internal training. I tried a lot of different things. And I realized, you know what, this is just not me. I do not like to have to be responsible for other people and to help them to grow and to give them feedback and to keep them, motivated and keep them working. And that was just not me. And I luckily had a really good manager that I went to, and I said, I'm really sorry, but if I try for 1,000 years, I don't think I'll ever get good at managing people. And luckily I had a manager that I was so comfortable speaking with that I could tell him that I was really bad at something. And you often think you have to like put only your best self forward, and you can't actually admit any weakness to your manager. Well, I said, I really truly suck at this. And he's like, you know what? That's all right. The things that you do really, really well. So be the best Jeff you can be. We can find someone else to do all the people management for you. And that was a great turning point for me of saying, I don't have to be really good at everything.
I think it's very easy to get caught up in things you don't understand, especially as I joined like Google 6 months ago full time. And sometimes I'm like, oh my God, I don't know this, I don't know this, I don't know this. And it's really easy to get like lost in, that process. So it's good to have a reminder that you might not be good at everything, but what you are good at, put your best self forward there.
Exactly. Sounds good. All right. I've got another meeting starting in just a second, but this has been totally, totally awesome. Really enjoyed speaking with both of you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Really
we
appreciate
really appreciate your time.
Absolutely.